They call themselves the Starborn. Demanded we hand over the artifact, like we were children, playing with their parents' things.
There is a moment in nearly every culture's mythology where a human being stops being human. They ascend. They transform. They step through a door that only opens one way, and whatever comes out the other side wears their face, speaks in their voice, carries their memories, but is no longer quite the same thing that went in. We have always told this story because we have always wanted to believe it, that there is a version of the human condition that transcends the human condition, that the right journey, the right sacrifice, the right threshold, crossed at the right moment, can remake a person into something that no longer bleeds the way the rest of us bleed. The Starborn look like that story. They move through the settled systems like something out of myth, suited in armor that seems to have grown from their skin, wielding forces that no amount of training or technology should produce, pursuing agendas that feel ancient even when they are standing right in front of you. You encounter them, and the immediate impression is of something that used to be human, the way a star used to be a cloud of gas. Technically accurate, practically irrelevant. But here is what makes that impression worth examining rather than simply accepting. Every single Starborn you will ever meet was, not so long ago, a person standing in exactly the situation you are in now. Someone who had heard about the artifacts, someone who found the temples, someone who assembled the pieces, stepped into the unity, and came out changed. The transformation is real, but it is not magic, and it is not divinity, and it is not random. It follows a process. It has a mechanism, and the mechanism, when you look at it carefully, raises questions that are considerably more unsettling than the Starborn themselves. Because the real question is not what the Starborn are. The real question is who built the process that makes them and what exactly they were expecting to produce. You could be forgiven for thinking of the artifacts as a treasure hunt. That is, on its surface, exactly what the Constellation mission looks like in its early stages. A collection of strange metallic objects scattered across the settled systems and beyond, each one inert on its own, each one humming with some quality that resists easy explanation. They are not radioactive in any conventional sense. They are not technological in any way that human or alien engineering has yet managed to replicate or reverse engineer. They do not do anything you can observe directly from the outside. They simply are, in the way that very old and very intentional things simply are, with a weight and a presence that suggests significance without confirming it. Constellation, that ragged and earnest organization operating out of the lodge in New Atlantis, has been gathering them for years by the time the story begins. They are scientists and explorers and dreamers, people who believe that the universe contains answers to questions humanity has not yet thought to ask, and they have organized themselves around the specific project of collecting these objects without fully understanding why. There is something genuinely admirable about that quality, the commitment to finding without yet knowing what you are looking for. It is also, it turns out, part of what makes them useful to a process that is considerably older and more deliberate than any of them realize. There are 24 artifacts in total. The significance of that number is not immediately apparent, and the game does not make a great ceremony of explaining it. What matters is that they are not merely compatible with each other, they are designed for each other, the way that components of a machine are designed for each other, with tolerances and orientations that could not have emerged from any process other than intentional manufacture. When they are assembled, when all 24 pieces come together into the structure the Starborn call the Armillary, they do not simply create an object, they create a condition. The assembly is a key, and what it opens is something that has been waiting patiently and without apparent impatience for the right hand to turn it. The scattering of the artifacts across the galaxy is not an accident of history or the result of some ancient catastrophe that broke a single object apart and sent its pieces tumbling across the light years. That framing would be tidier and, in its way, more comforting. The idea of a broken thing being reassembled, of restoration being the purpose. But the artifacts do not feel like pieces of something broken. They feel like pieces of something dispersed. There is a difference. A broken thing was once whole and then was not. A dispersed thing was placed where it was found, individually and deliberately, by someone who had a reason for the placement. Based on what the artifacts imply about their own placement, the distribution is purposeful. Someone put them where they would be found, not easily, not casually, but by people with the resources and the drive and the curiosity to go looking. The artifacts reward effort. They reward the kind of organized, sustained, intentional searching that only a certain kind of person or a certain kind of organization undertakes. Consider what it actually requires to gather all 24 of them. You need ships capable of grav-jumping across significant distances. You need funding, or at minimum, the organizational capacity to direct people and resources over extended periods without guaranteed results. You need institutional willingness to pursue something that cannot yet be justified in conventional terms, that cannot be sold to a board or a government as a rational investment, because its value is not yet legible. You need, in short, exactly the kind of people who built Constellation. If you were designing a filter, if you were trying to ensure that only people of a particular disposition reach the next stage of a process, scattering 24 pieces of a mechanism across dozens of star systems is a reasonable way to do it. This inference is difficult to avoid once you start reading the artifact distribution as intentional rather than incidental. It is not the only interpretation, but it is an elegant one because it ensures that the filter is self-selecting. The artifacts do not refuse people who lack curiosity or persistence. They simply do not get found by them. The mechanism does not need to actively exclude unsuitable candidates because the distribution of the artifacts means unsuitable candidates will never assemble them in the first place. This framing matters, not as a confirmed fact, but as an implication that the artifacts themselves seem to invite once you start looking at them as the outputs of intention rather than the outputs of circumstance. The settled systems are vast in ways that daily life tends to obscure. The distances between inhabited planets, between systems, between the edges of what humanity has reached and the further reaches that remain unexplored are genuinely immense. And yet the artifacts are distributed across that vastness in a pattern that Constellation has been slowly reconstructing piece by piece over years of effort that has cost them resources and relationships and, in some cases, lives. What makes this genuinely strange is not just the deliberateness of the distribution, it is the implied time scale. Whatever placed the artifacts did so with a confidence about the future that implies either vast patience or an understanding of how civilizations develop and expand that goes beyond anything the settled systems have yet achieved. Either way, the artifacts are not waiting for humanity as a species to mature. They are waiting for individuals, specific kinds of individuals. And the waiting has been going on for long enough that the entity or entities doing the waiting are no longer around to observe what they set in motion. That absence, the builders of the mechanism, gone long before anyone begins to interact with what they built, is one of the defining qualities of the artifacts and everything connected to them. They are orphaned architecture. They are a city whose founders have left and whose current inhabitants are only now beginning to understand what the buildings were originally for. And understanding that, sitting with the scale of the weighting and the precision of the distribution, the first thing it is natural to feel is not wonder. It is unease. Because something built this carefully and something that has been waiting this long was built and waiting for a reason. And reasons, when they are old enough and patient enough, have a way of not being the reasons you would have chosen for yourself. Before you ever touch an artifact, before you ever find yourself drawn into the gravitational pull of Constellation's mission, the temples are already out there, scattered across the galaxy with the same deliberate distribution as the artifacts themselves. They do not announce their presence. They do not broadcast on any frequency that standard sensors would pick up without knowing what to look for. They sit on remote planetary surfaces or in unusual orbital configurations, and they are easy to mistake for ruins at first encounter, which is, perhaps, another part of the design. Something that looks like a ruin invites exploration. It suggests discovery without suggesting danger. It does not suggest, at first glance, a mechanism that is actively waiting to do something to you. Inside each temple, the experience is the same: a zero-gravity interior space and a floating ring structure that emanates a quality that is difficult to describe as anything other than invitation. Not warmth exactly, not welcome in the social sense, more like the feeling of a door that has been left open, specifically and deliberately for you to walk through. The ring does not seem to be generating its effects through any mechanical process a sensor can identify. There are no visible power sources in the conventional sense, no discernible energy output that maps onto known physics, nothing that an engineering survey would be able to report on with confidence. The rings simply work in the way that things built by intelligences operating at a different level of understanding simply work, by doing things with the universe that no one on this side of the knowledge gap has worked out yet. What the temples grant is power in the most literal possible sense, abilities that have no business existing in a human body, because they correspond to no human biological function. The capacity to exert gravitational force without any generating mass behind it. The ability to move through the subjective experience of time at a different rate than the objective rate. Forces and fields and effects that, if a conventional physicist were asked to explain the mechanism, would produce a very long and very frustrated silence. Each temple grants a different ability, and the collection of them, over the course of moving through the galaxy, gives any starborn in progress a range of capabilities that is genuinely difficult to contextualize within the framework of what human achievement, even in the 24th century, has produced. But the powers themselves, when you examine them carefully, reveal something important about what the temples are actually doing, something that is easy to miss if you are focused on the practical utility of each individual ability. These are not, in any obvious sense, being given to the recipient. The framing of acquisition feels wrong. It is closer to say, and this is one of those interpretations the lore invites without confirming, that the temple is recognizing something in the person passing through it and unlocking a capacity that was somehow already there, waiting for the right conditions to become active. You do not gain the ability to manipulate gravity the way you would gain a weapon or a tool, something external to you that you learn to operate. You gain it the way you would gain fluency in a language that turns out to be your native tongue. The temple does not hand you something, it confirms something. The distinction matters when you start thinking about what the temples are actually for and who built them. A trap gives you something and takes something else without your full understanding of the exchange. A test gives you something conditional on demonstrating a quality. A selection mechanism gives you something as a signal that you have cleared a threshold, that you have been recognized as someone who belongs to the next stage of a process. The temples feel most like the third option, and the specificity of that feeling has implications. They are not rewarding you for being clever enough to find them. They are marking you. They are acknowledging that you have moved far enough along a particular path to be trusted with what comes next. The unknown builders of the temples, called the creators by the Starborn, who have thought longest about them, though what that name actually encompasses remains genuinely open, operated at a scale of intentionality that is difficult to fully absorb on first contact. They built not one temple, but many, each one calibrated to a specific power, each one apparently functional across timescales that dwarf human civilization. They built them across stellar distances that would require coordination of an order that no human political or institutional structure has achieved. They built them in places that are remote enough to reward sustained searching, but accessible enough that a sufficiently equipped explorer will eventually find them. Every specific quality of the temples points toward an intelligence that was thinking about the long term in ways that make human long-term planning look like thinking about tomorrow. What the builders were interested in, based on what they left behind, is transformation. Whatever the temples are for at the level of the builder's original intention, they are machines for changing people. And the specific kind of change they produce, the powers, the marking, the sense of capacity unlocked rather than capability added, suggests that the change they are designed to produce is not incidental to some other purpose. It is the purpose. The temples exist to change the people who pass through them. The question of what those people are being changed into, and toward what end, is the thread that connects the temples to the artifacts, to the unity, to every starborn you will ever encounter. There is a quality to the temple experience that does not survive being translated into pure information. Standing in that floating zero-gravity interior, watching the ring turn against the backdrop of an alien surface visible through whatever opening the temple presents to the sky, there is a sense of something paying attention, not watching in the surveillance sense, attending in the older sense, being present to what is happening, in the way that a witness is present to what they observe. The temple does not feel empty. It feels like a room that was recently occupied and has not yet lost the ambient warmth of whoever was just in it. Whether that quality is a design feature or a residue of however many people have passed through before you is a question that the temple, characteristically, declines to answer. The powers themselves deserve a closer look, not for their tactical utility, but for what they imply about the nature of the transformation they announce. Consider the gravitational abilities, the capacity to pull objects toward you, to create fields that affect the movement of matter without any conventional generating source. Gravity is not an energy you project, it is a property of mass. To produce gravitational effects without mass is not simply to do something clever with physics. It is to behave as though the normal rules of what produces what have been suspended specifically for you. The temples, in granting these abilities, seem to be marking you as something that the usual causal chain does not fully apply to, someone for whom certain rules that apply to everyone else have been renegotiated. That is not a comfortable quality to have. It is also not an accident. Whatever else the Starborn are, they are people who have been made slightly exterior to the physics that governs everyone around them. And that slight exteriority, that quality of being in the world, but not quite of it in the full sense, is the physical version of the displacement that the unity will later make permanent and complete. The unity is not a place exactly. It is more accurate to say that it is the absence of a place, the threshold between one iteration of the universe and another, the narrow passage through which someone who has completed the process must pass to become what the artifacts and the temples have been, together, preparing them to become. You can stand at the edge of it with all 24 artifacts assembled into their complete form and look into something that defies any casual description. It is not a door in any architectural sense. It is not a portal in the science fiction sense of a defined aperture with visible edges. It is more like the moment between sleep and waking, held open long enough to step through, a condition rather than a location, a state of affairs rather than a place you travel to. What happens when you enter the unity is, in physical terms, simple enough to describe. You leave the universe you came from. Permanently, you do not die. You do not simply disappear from the record of that universe's events. You pass through into another universe, one that is, for all practical purposes, identical to the one you left, except for the small and not so small ways that the particular history of this new universe has diverged from the one you knew. Your companions are there. The organizations you worked with are there. The settlements and the ships and the political structures are all present and functioning. But none of them are quite yours, because yours are gone. The universe you grew up in, the one whose specific history includes your specific choices, the one where the people who care about you carry the memories of the version of events that involved you. That universe is behind you, through a door that does not have a handle on the other side. This is, if you sit with it, rather than moving past it quickly, a staggering cost. The mythology of transformation tends to frame the threshold as a trial, something painful that you endure in order to reach the reward on the other side. The unity is not structured that way. The cost is not the threshold itself. The cost comes after. You pass through and you are powerful. You pass through and you have the Starborn suit and the abilities from the temples and a kind of clarity about the nature of the universe that most people will spend their entire lives reaching for without finding. But everyone you love is in a universe that is not this one anymore. Every relationship you built, every consequence you shaped, every moment whose significance depended on the specific history that you and another person share. All of that is on the other side of a passage that only goes one way. The Starborn suit is worth pausing on here because it is one of the most quietly significant details in the entire lore. It does not appear in a chest. It is not crafted from components or purchased from a vendor or rewarded by a quest line. It materializes as the transformation completes, as though it is a natural consequence of having passed through the unity, rather than a practical addition to the state of having passed through it. This suggests something important about the nature of the transformation, that whatever the unity does to a person extends to their physical presentation in the world, that becoming Starborn involves the world recognizing you differently, not just you being different on the inside. The suit is not armor in the conventional sense of a thing designed to absorb damage. It is, in its visual design and its mode of appearance, something closer to a declaration. It announces what you are the way that certain kinds of clothing announce membership, not through explanation, but through immediate recognition by anyone who has encountered the category before. Other Starborn know what the suit means because they wear one too. People who have never encountered a Starborn are not sure what they are looking at, but they know they are looking at something outside the ordinary categories. The suit does not need to explain itself. It is its own explanation. There is a further detail that is easy to overlook in the weight of everything else the unity involves. The suit changes with each passage through the unity. Each cycle produces a version of the suit that is distinct from previous versions. A visual record, in a sense, of how many times this particular person has been through the process. This is not cosmetic in any ordinary sense. It points towards something about the nature of the transformation that goes beyond the initial crossing. That repeated passage through the unity does not simply return you to the same enhanced state. It accumulates. Each crossing changes something further, marks the suit differently, moves you, perhaps only fractionally, perhaps more significantly than any single passage can reveal, further along whatever trajectory the process was designed to produce. The permanence of the departure from your home universe is worth returning to, because it is the piece of the Starborn condition that shapes everything else about how Starborn tend to behave. You are, after the unity, a person without a home in the deepest sense. Not homeless in the material sense of lacking shelter, but homeless in the sense of lacking a universe that is specifically yours, a history that belongs to the particular version of you that remembers making it. Every Starborn carries this. Every Starborn has left behind, permanently and by choice, the universe where their choices had the most weight. They live now in a universe where everything looks familiar, but nothing is the consequence of anything they did. That is a strange kind of freedom and a strange kind of grief, and how a particular Starborn navigates the intersection of those two things tells you a great deal about who they were before they crossed over. The Starborn's resistance to certain forms of harm, the sense that the usual vulnerabilities of a human body apply to them in a somewhat different way, is another product of the transformation that is easy to take as a simple upgrade and harder to read for what it implies. To be less susceptible to the things that damage ordinary humans is to be in a different relationship with risk. Ordinary risk management assumes that the cost of failure is injury or death, and calibrates behavior accordingly. A Starborn operating with a genuinely different relationship to physical harm is not simply more capable of taking on dangerous situations. They are operating from a different set of stakes. The decisions they make are made by someone for whom the worst-case scenarios most people are managing around simply do not apply in the same way. Whether this produces wisdom or a kind of recklessness that looks like courage from the outside depends, again, on who the person was before the crossing. The hunter has been through the Unity more times than he is likely to remember clearly, and his philosophy has calcified accordingly, though not into the kind of nihilism you might expect. He has not concluded that the process is empty. He has concluded that morality is. Whatever he believed at the start of his first cycle, the hunter that moves through the settled systems now has arrived at a position that is, in its own way, more coherent than it first appears. The Unity should be open to anyone strong enough to reach it. The artifacts are a competition. The strongest competitors deserve to advance. He has debated the ethics of power, he says, for something approaching forever, and all he has found are groups of people enforcing their will on others while calling it principle. His answer is not to abandon the competition. It is to compete without the pretense of ethical justification. This makes him, in a specific way, more honest than he is comfortable to be around. He is not lying to himself about what he wants from the cycle. He wants to accumulate the artifacts, assemble the Armillary, pass through the Unity, and emerge more capable than before. He wants to do this again. He has been doing this for long enough that the cycle is simply what existence means to him, not a destination, but a practice, a discipline made of repetition. The ruthlessness with which he pursues the artifacts, willing to kill Constellation members and destroy whatever stands between him and the next piece, is not cruelty for its own sake. It is the behavior of someone who has decided that competition is the only honest relationship to what the creators built. The Emissary represents the opposite philosophical response to the same transformation. Where the hunter has concluded that the Unity should be open to anyone strong enough to reach it, the Emissary has concluded that it should be earned through worthiness, and that most people cannot be trusted to determine their own worthiness. Having been through the Unity more than 100 times by their own account, the Emissary's position is one of paternalism, that has deepened over countless cycles into something that functions like conviction. The paternalism is not subtle, but it is not cynical either. The emissary genuinely believes that access to the unity should be managed, that the transformation should reach only the people who are ready for it, that the power and displacement and altered perspective it produces are too significant to be distributed without oversight. This is a position that comes from somewhere real. Whatever the emissary experienced across their cycles produced a deep concern about what the transformation does when it arrives in the wrong hands. What both of them represent, and what makes them interesting as philosophical positions rather than simply as antagonists, is the range of what the Starborn condition can produce in the people who carry it. They started the same way. They went through the same process. They emerged with the same fundamental transformation. And they arrived at conclusions that are not merely different, but almost perfectly opposed. The hunter's position is that the mechanism should run freely, without rules decided by competition. The emissary's position is that the mechanism should run carefully, managed by those already inside it. Neither of them has arrived at a place that involves simply being in the world without an agenda organized around who else gets access to the unity. And that shared quality, the inability, despite their opposed conclusions, to have a relationship with the Starborn condition that does not revolve around other people's access to it, tells you something about what long-term Starborn existence tends to do to a person's sense of proportion. Both of them are correct about something, and the correctness of each illuminates the other. The hunter is correct that the cycle continues without any discernible terminus, that gathering the artifacts and passing through the unity and emerging as Starborn in a new universe does not resolve anything, does not deliver the satisfaction that the mythological framing of transformation tends to promise. The process does not end with the crossing. It continues into the next universe, and the universe after that, and the evidence of how many people have done this, for how long, and what they found at the end of the track is more track. The hunter has accepted this completely. His philosophy is an adaptation to it, not a protest against it. The emissary is correct that the process is consequential, that becoming Starborn is not a neutral event, and that the character a person carries into the unity shapes what the Starborn condition looks like on the other side. This is demonstrably true. The hunter demonstrates it. The emissary demonstrates it. Every Starborn who has ever moved through the settled systems with an identifiable agenda demonstrates it. The transformation does not override character. It amplifies it, puts it in a higher stakes context, confronts it with conditions specifically designed to reveal what it is made of. The emissary's conclusion that this process should be gatekept is not irrational given the evidence. It is simply a conclusion that has the practical effect of concentrating power in the hands of those who have already undergone the transformation, which is, historically, how concentration of power tends to justify itself. There is a history of cycles implied in the existence of the hunter and the emissary that the game gestures at without fully documenting. What the hunter's trajectory suggests, and this is one of the more quietly haunting implications in the lore, is that his current philosophy is not the final one. Older iterations of the hunter eventually do reach the place the active hunter seems to be circling, a kind of disillusionment with the endless accumulation, a diminishing appetite for competition, a pull towards simply stopping. The Starborn call this stage the Pilgrim. The Pilgrim eventually retires, settles in a particular universe, takes on a life, disappears into whatever that universe offers. The hunter that stalks the settled systems is not yet the Pilgrim, but the Pilgrim is what the hunter is becoming, cycle by cycle, without necessarily knowing it. That progression, the competitive hunter who slowly transforms into someone who wants only to be still, is one of the most human arcs in a story full of people who have nominally left humanity behind. Beyond the hunter and the emissary, the implied history of Starborn suggests a much larger population of people who passed through the Unity and did not become organized around either nihilism or control. People who crossed over and lived in the new universe with the awareness of what they were and what they had left behind, quietly, without building philosophical systems around the experience. Some of them, probably, became exactly the kinds of legends that the settled systems culture contains. Figures whose capabilities and apparent durability gave them a mythological quality in the communities they moved through. Some of them became nothing particularly notable, just people carrying the memory of a transformation in a universe that had no context for it, living out whatever the new universe offered and eventually becoming part of its history in the ordinary ways. The full count of how many cycles have run, how many people have passed through the Unity, across however much time the mechanism has been operational, is not a number the game offers. This restraint is appropriate, because any specific number would feel reductive. What matters is not the count, but the implication of scale. The temples feel old in a way that exceeds the age of the settled systems. The artifacts were distributed by something that predates human space travel. If the mechanism has been running since before humanity reached the stars, then the history of Starborn is not a chapter in human history. It is something humanity wandered into midway through its running, a process that was already old when the first human grab jump happened, already waiting with its 24 pieces scattered across systems that no one with a human name had yet visited. That possibility, that the Starborn cycle is not specifically human, that humans are simply the current cohort passing through a mechanism built for any species capable of the necessary level of curiosity and effort, is one of the most quietly destabilizing ideas in the entire lore. It means that becoming Starborn is not something humanity achieved by being exceptional. It is something humanity arrived at by being the kind of thing that tends to arrive at it. The temples do not love humans. They do not care about humans in any detectable sense. They respond to people who pass through the rings. Whatever criteria they apply, and there is a reasonable argument that the only criterion is the willingness to do the work of finding and entering them, those criteria are presumably not human-specific. Constellation did not know what it was doing. This is not a criticism. It is, in its way, the most genuinely interesting thing about the organization. The people gathered in the lodge in New Atlantis, arguing about cosmology and funding and the significance of objects that could not yet be explained, were pursuing the artifacts because they believed that the universe contains answers to questions humanity has not yet formed correctly. They had built their entire institutional identity around the willingness to go looking for what they could not yet explain. And what they found, by following that willingness to its logical conclusion, was that they were a gear in a mechanism built by someone else, running a process that had been designed long before any of them were born. The irony is dense and not without warmth. Constellation was doing exactly what the artifact distribution seems designed to encourage. An organization that rewards curiosity, that pools resources to pursue distributed objects across stellar distances, that operates without guaranteed returns on the investment of effort and funding. This is precisely the kind of organization that would gather 24 artifacts over a sustained period without prematurely concluding that the project was not worth pursuing. Whether Constellation was somehow selected for this role in the sense that the distribution of the artifacts was calibrated to produce exactly this kind of organization, or whether Constellation simply happened to fit the profile that the distribution naturally rewards. This question the mechanism does not resolve. Both options have their own unsettling implications. The first requires the builders to have had predictive insight into the institutional history of a species that did not yet exist when they built their mechanism. The second requires only that they understood, at a general level, that sufficiently widespread distribution of rare and significant objects across challenging distances would reliably produce the kind of organization willing to collect them. The Lodge in New Atlantis, with its cluttered tables and its star maps and its atmosphere of organized enthusiasm, slightly in excess of its resources, is the physical expression of exactly the kind of institutional character the artifact distribution was designed to attract. You can stand in that building and feel the accumulated seriousness of people who are doing something they cannot entirely justify, and doing it anyway because they believe the unjustifiable thing matters. This is what genuine curiosity looks like when it is organized well. It is also, it turns out, what a selection mechanism looks like from the inside when you are one of the things being selected. The player's arc through the game, from new Constellation member to Starborn in progress, follows the shape of an initiation so precisely that it is difficult to believe the shape is accidental. You begin as someone without context, someone who touched an artifact and was changed in a way they cannot explain, marked by the contact without yet knowing what the marking means. You join an organization of people who have been working toward a goal they cannot yet fully articulate. You travel to the temples not because you were told to, but because the process of following the artifacts leads you there, and you emerge from each temple with something added to you that is not knowledge in the conventional sense, but something closer to capacity. You gather the artifacts piece by piece through effort and conflict and the specific kind of loss that comes from caring about people and then watching the galaxy demonstrate that caring does not insulate you from consequences. And then you stand at the unity, with everything assembled, and the mechanism presents you with the only thing it has been withholding, a choice. The choice is not forced. The mechanism does not compel anyone to cross over. It waits. It offers. It makes clear, without explanation, what the options are. And then it leaves the decision to the person standing at the threshold. This is, structurally, the most important thing about the Unity. Not the transformation it produces, not the cost it extracts, but the fact that it is a choice. Everything before the Unity happens to you, in the sense that the artifacts have to be found and the temples have to be entered, and the process has its own momentum that carries you forward once you are inside it. But the final step, the one that determines whether you become Starborn or not, requires active consent. You have to choose to cross. No one who has not chosen to cross has become Starborn. This is not a trivial detail. It means that whatever the mechanism is selecting for, it includes the willingness to accept the transformation when offered, the willingness to pay the cost of leaving, to say yes to the permanent displacement that comes with gaining everything the Unity offers. The people who choose to remain, who stand at the threshold and decide to stay in their universe, to keep the specific relationships and memories and rootedness that crossing would permanently sever, are not failing the mechanism's test. They are making a different claim about what kind of transformation matters. To stay is to say that what the journey itself has already produced, the growth, the perspective, the particular quality of a person who has gathered 24 artifacts and found 24 temples and walked through the fires that those pursuits inevitably involve, is a sufficient transformation, that the Starborn condition is not the only form of becoming available, that the cost is real, and the decision to decline it is not weakness, but a different kind of answer to the same question. The people who cross are not abandoning anything they could have kept. The choice is made with full awareness of what it means, and what it means is clear. They are accepting something they could have declined in exchange for something that cannot be obtained any other way. Whether that acceptance constitutes wisdom or a particular kind of surrender, whether becoming Starborn is an evolution or a very elegant form of erasure, is a question that the mechanism, in its patient and architectural silence, refuses to answer for you. What the cycle of Starborn reveals, when you follow it from its beginning to whatever it uses instead of an end, is something about the relationship between transformation and purpose that most mythologies prefer to leave comfortably vague. The gods of human imagination tend to be what they always were, but more so. They were strong and they became powerful. They were wise and they became omniscient. The transformation amplifies but does not fundamentally reorient. What you were before is simply more after. The Starborn do not work this way. A person who was curious becomes Starborn, and the curiosity persists, but it now operates in a context where the things worth being curious about are different, where the questions that felt urgent in the old universe may be answered, or irrelevant, or simply inaccessible from this side of the threshold. A person who was protective becomes Starborn, and the protectiveness persists. But now it has to navigate a universe where the people it wants to protect do not remember being protected before, where the history of the relationship that gave the protectiveness its meaning is on the other side of a door that does not open from the outside. The transformation does not amplify what you were. It puts what you were into a situation specifically designed to reveal whether what you were was really what you were, or just what you were able to maintain under familiar conditions. This is why the starborn powers, as impressive as they are practically, feel less significant than the displacement that accompanies them. Any sufficiently advanced technology can produce effects indistinguishable from what the temples offer. But nothing except the unity can produce the specific condition of being permanently a stranger in a universe that looks like home. That condition is the actual weight of the starborn existence, the thing that shapes every decision and relationship and philosophical position a starborn develops over time. The powers are the visible surface, the displacement is the substance. The Sanctum Universum, that religious organization whose theology is organized around the unity as a divine phenomenon, looks at the starborn and sees the evidence of their faith made literal. People who have been touched by something beyond ordinary human experience, marked by it, changed by it in ways that are visible and verifiable. What the congregation does not know, and what the game holds as a revelation for later, is that the keeper who leads them in New Atlantis, Keeper Aquilus, is himself a starborn, an older iteration of the hunter, worn down through cycles into the form the starborn call the Pilgrim, who eventually retired and settled in a universe, took on a life, and became the head of a religion built around the very thing he had been through. Aquilus does not lead his congregation in the reverence of a mystery. He leads them in the reverence of something he has survived. Whether that makes his faith more genuine or more ironic is a question the lore is content to leave unanswered. What it does mean is that the unity does not need theologians to speak for it. In at least one case, the theologian is the testimony. The question of who built the temples and the artifacts, the creators, as the Starborn call them, though what that name actually contains, no one has confirmed. And what they intended for the people who passed through the unity is one of the most genuinely open questions in the lore. Many Starborn, the hunter and the emissary among them, carry an awareness that the cycle is pointing somewhere, that the repeated crossings are moving towards something, that enough passages through the unity might eventually lead to a place where the creators can be encountered directly. Whether this is faith, logic, or the specific kind of hope that only emerges after everything else has been stripped away, it shapes how Starborn engage with the cycle. The creators left a mechanism so precisely engineered that it has been running, by implication, for longer than any human civilization, and they left no manual, no explanation, no detectable trace of their own nature or their own intentions. They built something, and then they were gone, and the something they built keeps building people. There is a position worth holding as a possibility rather than a conclusion, one the lore invites without endorsing, which is that the creators were themselves Starborn, or something that Starborn eventually become, that the mechanism was designed by people who had already been through it, who emerged into some further stage of existence that the current cycle of Starborn has not yet reached, and that the temples and artifacts are the attempt of that further existence to keep producing more of itself. If that is how it works, and there is no way to confirm it from inside the cycle, then the repeated passages through the unity do not simply return you to the same place. They return you to what looks like the same place, but with a different set of capabilities and a different relationship to loss, and a different quality of attention to the things that matter. What appears to be a loop could, on this reading, be a spiral. If that reading holds, then the Starborn who have been through the Unity many times are not simply more powerful. They are more processed, further along a track that the Creator set in motion, and the Starborn are still running. The Hunter's competitive drive and the Emissary's paternalistic conviction are not failures of the process. They are positions within it. The Pilgrim's eventual retirement is another. The question is, what lies past all of them, and whether anything that has arrived there would still recognize itself as having started where the rest of us start. Whether the thread that connects a person standing in New Atlantis holding an artifact they do not yet understand to whatever emerges from a sufficient number of Unity crossings is a thread long enough to hold the weight it would have to carry. What remains at the end of all of this is the central tension that the Starborn embody simply by existing in the settled systems. They are proof that the threshold can be crossed, but they do not agree on whether crossing it was the right thing to do. They are proof that the transformation is real, but they do not agree on what it means. They are the mechanism's products, and they cannot even agree on what the mechanism was for. Every Starborn you encounter is a different answer to the same question, and the variety of those answers is itself a kind of answer if you are willing to read it. The Starborn are not gods. They are not monsters. They are not symbols of what humanity can achieve if it reaches far enough, or tries hard enough, or sacrifices enough of the right things. They are what happens when a person in possession of enough curiosity and enough persistence and enough willingness to pay a particular kind of cost walks through a door that someone else built for reasons that person will never fully know. What they are on the other side depends entirely on what they were when they stepped in, and what they do with what they have become. Whether they pursue control or acceptance or exhaustion or something that does not yet have a name tells you everything about what the transformation actually transforms. The door is still open. The artifacts are still out there, distributed across systems that not all of them have been found in yet, waiting with the patience of something that has been waiting since before the settled systems had their current names. Somewhere, in some universe very much like this one, a person who has never heard of Constellation is about to pick up something that hums in a way they cannot explain. They will not know what to do with it. They will carry it for a while, uncertain. And then, something in them, call it curiosity, call it the specific gravity that certain kinds of questions exert on certain kinds of minds, will lead them toward the next piece. The mechanism does not begin when you find the first artifact. The mechanism began a very long time ago, and you arrive to it already in motion, already having produced more Starborn than anyone has bothered to count, already running the same patient selection process it has always run. The only new thing is you. What you do at the threshold. What you answer when the Unity asks its one quiet, permanent question is the only part of this story that was never already written. Keep looking, keep asking. The archive is deep, and the questions worth carrying are the ones that get heavier the longer you hold them.